Earnings season turns up some strong profits, but CEOs are unsure about the future. The housing market might be finding a flaw, and we'll tell you about the oil company that made a $48 billion profit in just 3 months. It's Monday, the 15th of August, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael, and welcome back. How was the snow?
The snow was fantastic. Thanks, Sean. It was actually a really nice kind of little breakaway. I had a little bit of fear and greed kind of sprinkled throughout because what's a snow trip without listening to Sean Aylmer? But I had a fantastic time, and Adam did a great job filling in as well. So I'm very grateful to him.
Yeah, he did a very commendable job, Adam. I'm sure he'll be listening to this morning and kind of relieved that he doesn't have to be in front of the microphone this week.
Oh, well, he'll be back for the weekend edition a little bit later on. And, of course, Safe Word as well. We cannot forget Safe Word.
We can't. Did you know last Thursday when Safe Word came out, I'm not sure that Adam and I mentioned it in the Fear and Greed show. And subsequently, I thought to myself, I'm in big trouble. Because when Michael realises we haven't been talking about Safe Word, he won't be happy.
I didn't want to raise this with you on air, but it was the top thing I needed to mention in our operations meeting coming up this week. So we shall address this a little bit later on, Sean. But you've got a good interview coming up today with Brian Nick from global asset manager Nuveen.
That's right. We talk about investing in overseas markets and fixed income and all sorts of things. It's a great chat if you're an investor.
Sure is. But the main story this morning, Sean, the full year earnings season in Australia has kicked off with a bang, and there's been some really solid results so far.
That's right. And that's helped support the local market, which ended up slightly last week. About 30 major companies have reported so far, including Telstra and Commonwealth Bank, and the signs have been pretty positive. Now, of course, companies like getting the good news out early, so it's probable that as the earnings season continues over the next fortnight, things might deteriorate somewhat. That's pretty usual. So far, about half the results have been better than expected, according to Shane Oliver, chief economist at AMP. Almost 2/3 have reported higher earnings than a year ago. There's also been about 27% of companies below expectations, which is about average, really, and 1/3 with lower profits than a year ago.
And what about dividends?
They're all important, aren't they? Look, the story isn't as positive unless you own Telstra shares. Less than half of the companies that have reported so far have upped dividends, which is fewer than normal. Telstra did, though, for the first time in 7 years. That's great news for the more than 1 million shareholders, particularly all those retirees out there. But we just haven't seen the special dividends this time around, which we saw in previous earnings seasons. Remember, we saw the big miners, BHP, Rio Tinto, come out with some massive dividends. We haven't had that this time around.
All right. What about the CEOs, Sean? Do they sound upbeat in their outlook statements?
It's a bit mixed. Now, this is kind of the most important part of earnings season, what CEOs think is going to happen over the next 3, 6, 12 months. Clearly, there are price pressures coming through, and staffing is a big, big problem in many sectors. There's also signs of slowing consumer demand, as highlighted by the slump in consumer confidence in recent months. That's clearly worrying management out there. Michael, it's a busy week coming up. By the end of this week, we'll know a lot more about how the economy is ticking over. BlueScope and JB Hi-Fi are out today. BHP is a big one. That's out tomorrow. Santos is another one I'd just like to highlight. That's out on Wednesday. It will be particularly interesting given what's happened to gas prices.
Okay. How did the local ASX end up on Friday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed the day down 0.5% to 7,033 points. For the week, it was up just a touch, 0.2%. On Friday, the banks and Telstra did well, but mostly large caps went backwards. One exception were the energy companies. Woodside, Beach Energy and Viva Energy all rose around 3%. In fact, those three were the best on the day.
And what about international markets? What's been happening?
Well, it's been a pretty incredible few weeks for Wall Street. The market was sold off on the fears of inflation and higher interest rates. Then earnings season was pretty good, and jobs data showed people can find work in the world's biggest economy if they want to. And the most recent inflation data suggests price rises might have peaked. As a result of all this, the S&P 500 has bounced nearly 17% from its June lows. Pretty incredible, a remarkable turnaround. Economists warn that it might be too early to get too excited about peak inflation. The cost of labour is rising, as are service costs, and economies aren't out of the woods yet. Central banks are still lifting interest rates. There's plenty of geopolitical risk, and a recession in the US is still a possibility. I'd throw the United Kingdom into that one as well. As a result, very few big investors are definitively calling the bottom of the equity market, but they are talking about it, and that's significant. And just before we leave international markets, Michael, we head into the week with a much stronger Aussie dollar. It's trading above 71 US cents.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, we know that the housing market's been tumbling for a couple of months now, with falling prices in some capital cities and substantially lower auction clearance rates. But there was a bit of positive news over the weekend.
There was. Preliminary auction clearance rates have risen for the third week in a row, which is a sign that the national housing market has found some sort of balance. Listings have started to rise, which is good news and also typical of this time of the year as we head into the spring selling season. The national clearance rate over the last week was 61.5%. 2 percentage points up from a week earlier, according to CoreLogic. It's the first time since June that the rate has actually breached 60%. Melbourne recorded its highest clearance rate since May at 66%. Sydney was nearly 60%. Brisbane fell again to 41%. Adelaide was a top capital city at 72% and Canberra hit 64%. These are all good signs, though no one is calling the housing slump over just yet. The real test will come in the upcoming spring selling season, which is traditionally the busiest time of the year.
Auction season, it's always exciting. Are you a bit of a real estate watcher, Sean? Do you actually go into neighbourhood kind of open houses just to check them out?
Only over the weekend, Jackie said to me, we should go and have a look at some of the houses around the place that are coming up for sale.
Fantastic. No, especially when you're renovating as well, which I know you are. It's always good just to see what everyone else is doing, just so that you can be that little bit better than your neighbours.
That's right. Do you do that?
No. Yes. I love a good open house. I love a good auction. I just like being there as a spectator just to see what's going on because it's real live theatre every Saturday.
Yeah, it sure is. It's great fun.
All right, moving on. Acting Prime Minister Richard Marles has called for a return to normal, peaceful behaviour in the Taiwan Strait and reaffirmed Australia's support for the One China policy.
In his final day in the top job before Anthony Albanese returns to his desk today, Mr. Marles said it was important to see a de-escalation of tensions in the region, which is central to Australia's future. Now, the One China policy doesn't recognise Taiwan as a separate country, but Canberra maintains unofficial contacts promoting economic trade and cultural interests with Taiwan. Mr. Marles said the Labor government had attempted to change the tone of the conversation with Beijing, but challenges still remained. He added that Australia's relationship with both Washington and Tokyo were as close now as at any time in the past.
Sean, how about this one? A major security scare yesterday. A gunman fired 5 shots at glass windows inside Canberra Airport before being tackled to the ground by police.
Yes, the alleged offender just walked in and started firing. As the man was shooting, workers and travellers were told to evacuate and the airport was locked down and all aircraft movements were halted. Now, the man was detained. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese actually tweeted not long after the incident that there was no ongoing threat. That seems to be the case, but very worrying that someone can walk in with a firearm to a major airport in the country and just start shooting.
Yeah, pretty scary. Now, we're going to hear plenty, Sean, about the upcoming Jobs Summit next month. And yesterday, Greens leader Adam Bandt confirmed that he'd be attending.
He did. Around 100 people from business, the union movement and government organisations will attend the 2-day summit. Yesterday, Mr Bandt said he'd use the summit to push for the repeal of tax cuts already scheduled and greater investment in social services. The one person, Michael, who so far hasn't accepted his invitation is opposition leader Peter Dutton. It'll be interesting, the Job Summit. Last week we heard from a few CEOs talking about we don't need jobs, we actually need people to do the jobs. And I think that's kind of an interesting distinction.
Yeah, sure is. Now, federal and state energy ministers met on Friday and agreed to a series of reforms to the gas market.
That's after they were told by the Australian energy market operator that challenges will remain for the next couple of years. The reforms include extending most of the AEMO's powers and functions on the East Coast to allow gas suppliers to better forecast and manage supply shortfall risks. They include giving federal and state energy ministers powers to declare certain transmission lines as having national significance, and the ministers also agreed to include an emissions reduction in the national energy objectives.
And the education ministers also met and they agreed that the system is, quote, screaming out for reform.
That's right. They're the words of Federal Minister Jason Clare. Now, we talked a bit about this last week on the show and the need to up the number of teachers across the country. A number of reforms were floated late last week, including fast-tracking citizenship for highly skilled teachers, particularly in those STEM subjects, paid internships and better long-term mentoring, possibly by retired teachers. Former head of the New South Wales Education Department, Mark Scott, will head up an expert panel to look at what reforms are needed. That's expected to report next year.
All right. Insurer IAG announced a big drop in full-year profit thanks to investment markets and is going to target more customers in the home and motor insurance market.
The Sydney-based insurer behind brands such as NRMA said the full-year cash profit had fallen to $213 million from $747 million. That's massive. Now, apart from investment markets, insurers, including IAG, have been hit hard by floods along the east coast. IAG's flood bill came in at $1.2 billion, which was much higher than its initial forecast of $765 million.
Sleep disorder and breathing device company ResMed said earnings jumped more than 60% last financial year as demand for its products outstripped supply.
The San Diego-based company, which is listed both on Wall Street and the ASX, makes products to treat sleep apnea, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and asthma. Now, it's struggled with supply chain issues for quite a while now. You just can't get the stuff to build its products. Its share price ticked up in the last week or so, but it fell 3% on Friday.
And just recapping the news out of New South Wales State Parliament on Friday, Sean, this is a big story. 5 people have said they experienced attempted or actual sexual assault while working in a New South Wales parliamentary workplace. And almost half of sexual harassment incidents in the past 5 years were allegedly perpetrated by MPs.
Very, very disturbing. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet released the Broderick investigation into workplace culture in New South Wales Parliament and said it had unearthed sobering, confronting and completely unacceptable findings. 3 men and 2 women disclosed their experience of attempted or actual assault in the past 5 years, and people with a diverse sexuality were overrepresented among those statistics. 1 in 5 workers said they experienced sexual harassment, which the report said represented a significant proportion of the New South Wales parliamentary workforce. Just over 40% of sexual harassment incidents were perpetrated by MPs, while female MPs were the most likely to report having experienced sexual harassment in the past 5 years. Hard to believe that that's occurring still in this day and age.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, moving on to overseas news, and you mentioned earlier, Sean, the UK economy. Well, it shrank during the June quarter as households reined in spending.
It was the first decline since the COVID pandemic, and gross domestic product ended down 0.1%. A fall in manufacturing also contributed to the decline. The Bank of England expects that 40-year high inflation will tip the economy into recession later this year. What's happening in the UK? Prices are rising. The economy is going backwards. That's stagflation. That is the worst of both worlds.
Now, how about this one, Sean? We mentioned this at the top of the show, and I just can't get my head around the numbers here. Saudi Aramco, which is the largest oil company in the world, has posted a $48 billion profit for just 3 months.
It is hard to imagine that amount of money. It's the biggest quarterly net profit ever posted by a company. The Saudi Arabian government-owned oil giant benefited from surging oil prices, obviously. Revenue climbed 80% to $150 billion in just 3 months. Its chief executive said he expects oil demand to continue to grow for the rest of this decade. Of course, the dividend goes to the Saudi Arabian government. And so for the quarter, they made $18 billion. Not bad.
Not bad at all. And finally, Sean, the person accused of stabbing author Salman Rushdie has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault charges.
Mr. Rushdie remains in hospital but is no longer on a ventilator and is able to talk. The Indian-born author spent years in hiding after Iran urged Muslims to kill him over his novel The Satanic Verses. He was stabbed in the neck and torso on Friday in New York. A preliminary law enforcement review said the social media accounts of the attacker, Hadi Mehta, suggested he was sympathetic to Shiite extremism and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's funny, this story, when I heard about it over the weekend that Salman Rushdie had been attacked, it kind of brought back dreadful memories of that period where he was in hiding and Iran was chasing him. It was just an awful period, I think.
Yeah, pretty frightening stuff. Now, up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and today you're speaking with Brian Nick from the global asset manager Nuveen.
That's right. We talk all about investing overseas, particularly in the fixed income market, which I think many of us don't quite understand as well as we do equities. Brian was great. He put it all in plain English, and if you're an investor, it is definitely worth listening to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nuveen has, I think, more than $1 trillion in assets under management, so they tend to know what they're talking about.
They do.
And of course, it's Monday, which means Fear and Greed the week ahead with our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas, is available today.
That's right. This week, it's all about the labour market and wages, and Stephen takes us through all that.
All right, that's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 15th of August, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.